This story covers the rise and fall of one of the most influential nations on the Iaddithis world-building server. Albia was one of the first nations on Iaddithis, and safe to say, the first nation that actually had an impact on shaping the world on both geographical and political level. In its existence, Albia had to deal with a lot of enemies: betrayal, theft, bandits, invading armies, and much, much more. Some of it was a little bit more justified than others. During their time, Albia has always been a key nation in the world, and it was viewed by many as the world-dominating power. In the early days, the Republic of Albia could have easily contained 75% of the world's population. This big success was due to the organization and structural leadership that was set up within the nation. Albia was, and always has been, a strong democratic nation. This would eventually be one of the many reasons they quickly gained enemies. Multiple elections passed, with the player FS Seeker always coming out on top. Speculation had it that the elections were rigged or straight up a lie, but nothing of that was ever confirmed nor proven. No matter what public opinion of Albia was, they kept ruling their nation the way they did for months, and with great success. Eventually, former friends and citizens would turn their back on the nation, becoming bandits just to see its potential downfall. However, none succeeded. Albia had, what is deemed by many, a very controversial way of handling diplomatics, making decisions based on what was best for their nation and leaving others in the cold. But I suppose who could blame them? As time went on, Albia had to keep fighting off attackers, political as well as physical, creating new alliances and engaging in unfavourable diplomatic exchanges, all to keep their dream alive. But of course, newer and bigger nations started to show up, and it was only a matter of time before they would rival the power and influence of Albia. Eventually, Albia somewhat turned its back to the world, having enough of being targeted by so many. Getting accused, sometimes justified, sometimes wrongly, they started to focus on their internal problems and attempted to rebuild, or to keep building, their nation's dream. They left the International Assembly, and their actions would shake up the world forever. The player Simply Just Lazy, Emperor of Tanu, never kept it a secret that he had problems on a political level with Albia. He hated them for their hegemony over other nations' actions, as well as their unfair treatment to other nations and other people. With his influence and being known as a strong PvPer, Simply Just Lazy straight up declared war on Albia, with only one goal: the destruction of the nation. From his point of view, Albia had wronged the world more than enough, and it was time for them to get knocked down. On the 27th of November 2021, Simply Just Lazy gathered all the leaders of his alliance and formally declared war on FS Seeker and the nation of Albia. Both parties discussed terms, came to agreements, but war was inevitable. Simply Just Lazy would give Albia roughly 2 weeks to prepare, and then he would lay siege on Nova Domus, the capital of Albia. Tanu would gain help from Limo, a nation that had been invaded by Albia before. After its invasion, Limo was left with a puppet government in power. The Confederate, a nation that became feared worldwide after the successes they had in previous wars, considered by many the greatest military force with the most skilled warriors known in Iaddithis. Former enemies of Albia would take up arms once again to defeat Albia once and for all. Both parties started to prepare and started an immense grind for gear. The Albian alliances would quickly start to create defensive strategies, and a big defensive moat was started to be dug around the outer walls of Nova Domus. As both Albia and Tanu are one of the most oldest nations in the world. Word of the coming war spread like wildfire all over Iaddithis. People tried to get information about who these world powers were and why they were going to war. Newer and smaller nations would join in, to defend or to destroy the once mighty republic. Some were motivated by hatred, others deceived by words of others. Leaders, soldiers, even politicians, farmers, and merchants. It felt like everyone joined in. No matter the reason or the cause, this war was set to be the biggest the world had ever seen. After days of preparing, it was finally time. As the dew settles on the grass after the sun rises on another day, an army of warriors stands atop a hill overlooking the defences of Novodomus. The silence is quickly broken as flames from the arrows on both sides of the gorge flicker and wave as the wind blows in from the west, settling in the valley between the two forces. In the distance, the sound of battle rages as soldiers from both parties clash together. Both sides engage in combat almost simultaneously. The Tanu Alliance rushing across the field to take control of the siege banner, dodging and looking for cover as they are being rained down upon by Albion marksmen. The fighting soon rotated towards the gate, as both armies realised neither was going to gain anything from the constant rain of arrows. As a small group of Tanu's forces attempted to take the gate, many independent skirmishes had broken out across the battlefield. World's best soldiers fought together in intense battles which lasted extremely long due to god apples. It was clear to see that both parties had been preparing heavily. Both parties had just lost as many as they had killed in these skirmishes. The losses were immense. In the meantime, the Albion defences held off the dwindling battalion that tried to take the gate of Novodomus. A Tanu soldier flung an arrow across the gorge and over the wall. A lucky shot, straight into the player, Kaiser, of Goebi, putting an end to his reign, and causing Albia to lose a big part of their alliance. Though Albia's defence was successful, the war came at a heavy cost, as they lost more than they had gained. Specifically, after the first battle was done, and treaties were already beginning to be brought up, and one of the strongest allies, the Sentinels, were beginning to see that what they desired would only come to them in a small amount. After realising this to be true, the Sentinels' army revolted against the Albion government until they were to give in to their demands. Afraid of losing their ally, and with their backs against the wall, Albia gave in to their demands and managed to keep the Sentinels on their side. However, this event single-handedly decided the outcome of the war in the favour of the Tanu Alliance. Because of the revolt, smaller towns within the Albia broke off and declared independence and withdrew support from the war, as they saw Albia's demise was now imminent and took the chance to break away as soon as possible. Knowing that time is short and that this age was over, First Consul F.S. Seeker stood down from his position. Though the outcome was still uncertain, it was certain that the Albion government would never be the same afterwards. After a good night's sleep, both parties commenced once again. The second battle would start, and both parties, their strategy were modifications of the first. Instead of infiltrating or defending Novodomus, each side would shift their focus and efforts on protecting the banner, in which was placed outside. And instead of using small skirmish tactics, each side would employ major fighting forces against each other. With the rising of the sun came the exposing of both battalions facing towards the banner. Many of the archer who once stood atop of Novodomus' wall are now standing in uniform across the valley below, waiting to take on the invading forces and defend their homeland. The battle began at noon, as the massive armies met in the valley. The Tanu allies rushed to meet the Albion ones in a clash of extraordinary proportions. In the chaos of battle, many soldiers lose their target, loosely following around soldiers attacking important figureheads. The Tanu army almost seemed to dominate in the early stages of this chaos, where their quicklings of the player Emi Duband and G, the crossbower, However, the tide quickly turned towards Albia as archers on top of the wall began to descend to help the Albion forces. Both sides find themselves once again in this stalemate, and repeat of the first battle seems inevitable. As the battle heats up, the Tanu army retreats and regroups, giving Albia control of the banner. As the forces of Albia gain control over the banner, Tanu forces take a needed breather to regroup and rearm. Both sides' gear were severely damaged and even completely lost, most likely prompting both armies, whether intentional or not, to take a final stand. Once Albia had banner control, the Tanu army emerged from the hill into the valley once again, for what would become the decisive battle of Day 2. Immediately after descending, the Tanu alliance quickly began eliminating the Albion forces, not leaving room for a response. While initial counterattacks saw some success, they were no match for the combined effort of the Tanu and the strong soldiers of the Confederate, crashing down on them. With the Tanu alliance killing a large majority of the Albion forces, the battle was resulting in a Tanu victory, and only further increasing the fall of Albia. The battle for Novodermis. This battle was the last and least eventful. However, the battle would result in the complete resolution of the conflict between Albia and Tanu, as well as the rest of the world. But the impact of the battle could be felt from even the smallest of nations in the corner of the world. When the army of Tanu approached the Novodermis walls for the last time, they found no resistance of the occupation. The player AJ Moody was the only one left. When the Tanu alliance approached him, he put on his helmet and grabbed his sword to fight to the death. AJ Moody did not last long against the overwhelming Tanu forces. However, his last stand goes on in history as the final battle of the First World War. As the Tanu alliance occupies the city, the fall of Albia is at hand as terms of surrender are drafted, and Albia is finally disbanded. The First World War marked a major turning point in the political and military world, as the once dominant nation Albia was completely removed from the world stage, forever changing the exchange of power between the world powers. Till today, nothing in Iaddithis has made a larger impact than the outcome of this war, and it shall forever be known as the First World War of Iaddithis. Whether you don't know who they were, you hated them or loved them, joined them or left them, there is no denying that the Republic of Albia left a mark on this world, and may their story inspire many new nations to achieve their goals and their dreams.